on the CAEP website for you to access or share or whatever. My PowerPoints too are to be posted on the CAEP website. So let's get this going. You know the webinar basics, basic rules. Please remember to mute your phone. I can mute you from here, so if I do hear feedback from a particular phone, I can mute it, so no panic. Do, however, remember to unmute yourself if you want to talk. I've embedded some feedback and question pauses in the webinar, and you can just speak up when I call for that. You can also ask a question during the presentation by either raising your hand, and there's a little hand icon, I believe, next to your name. You can raise your hand to indicate you have a question to raise, and I can call on you. Or you can use the question and answer and type in a question. I would like to point out that if you do use the chat room or the Q&A feature, that you address your question to host and presenter. A couple of times at these webinars when I've gone to sign out, at the end I have found that there have been questions entered in that I didn't receive during the webinar, and I think it's because people chose to address it to attendees, which then doesn't include me as the presenter. So when you type your question in, you get to select who to send that question to. I ask you to send it to host or host and presenter. As you can see, we'll post the PowerPoint on June 20th, more or less, after we get done with the next presentation. Okay. So our goal and agenda for today is really to provide you with an introduction to the proposed content, the quality, and the use of plans in the self-study. I was noticing that aside from selective improvement and transformation initiative plans, which are included in the accreditation handbook, there isn't a whole lot of information about how to structure a plan that can be submitted to CAEP as evidence. So what I want you to be able to do when we complete this webinar is to identify where the components, the standards, or the circumstances that you can submit a plan in your self-study. And then I want you to be able to know that there are really 3 different types of plans that are acceptable to CAEP, and we'll go into each one of those and what the content should be. And then I hope you'll be able to describe the sections of each type of those plans to be submitted in the self-study. And that's sort of the scope of what we'll cover today. Okie dokie. So this slide has a lot of information on it, and we'll go through it one by one. I do have the accreditation handbook open on my desktop, and so we'll be referring to those. Under the column that says reference, it says AH pages, 92 to 94, whatever. AH refers to the accreditation handbook. I also have open on my desktop, and so you might want to, if you have it handy as well, is the rubric, CAEP rubric for reviewing self-studies. And so we'll take a look at that because there are a couple of places where plans are mentioned in that rubric. And I also have the evidence guide because there's a particular section in that towards the end that tells about case studies or plans if you don't have data for Standard 4. We'll get into that in a minute. So one of the first places where the CAEP standards, the CAEP components mention plans is in component 1.4. And what CAEP is allowing here is during the phase-in to provide a plan for assessments and instruments that demonstrate the criteria for college and career-ready standards and performance outcomes. So let me hop over to the accreditation handbook and take a peek. Okay. Oh, brother, this worked 10 minutes ago. Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to end the show, and we're going to go over to the accreditation handbook, and then we'll pop right back into it. On pages 92, 96, I believe. it says that you can submit a plan here under 1.4, plan to build performance evidence that demonstrates candidates' ability to teach for those college and career-ready standards. And so in the accreditation handbook, you can see this whole section in the middle on assessment planning. So if you're going to submit a plan about how you're going to assess those candidates and their abilities to teach to college and career-ready standards, it talks about a phase-in plan and what that phase-in plan should include. It should include provider identification of key criteria, what are the performance outcomes, what instruments will be used, and then if you scroll down a little further to page 93, you can see where it says the phase-in plan for assessments and what it might include, okay? On the scoring guides, acceptable levels of performance, and those could be focused teaching experience, video evidence, lesson and unit plan evidence, okay? And so if you're thinking about submitting a plan about assessing candidate proficiencies for college and career-ready standards, that is in component 1.4, and you can find it right here in the accreditation handbook with the details. So let's go back to the desktop, okay, and go up a little more to that chart. Okay, and open it up again. I'm sorry I'm having to do this. When I tested it earlier, I could easily get to my accreditation handbook and other documents, but something is not working for me. Okay, so the next area where a plan can be submitted, and I'm loosely defining plan in this particular case because what the accreditation handbook talks about on pages 96 and 97 are that you can submit a test, and I put it in quotes here, of a specific facet of placement. You remember component 2.3 is all about the clinical experience. And so what CAEP is suggesting is that you can submit a study plan, if you will, of how you're to test the field placement duration, breadth, depth, intensity, coherence, those criteria that are listed in component 2.3, and that you can submit a plan to study those, a study of your field experiences to determine what is the most effective field experience for your candidate. And so let's go back to that accreditation handbook on pages 96 and 97 and take a peek at what that says in more detail. There we go, 96, 97, there we go, right there. As you can see here, at the very last bullet in the first column on the measure or type of image, and the very first bullet, it says selection of one of the facets of preparation based on analyses of data and individual fit to examine current placement and then test that specific facet systematically to gather data on what works. And so what CAEP is suggesting here is that you can submit a study of that, and you can see where it describes it in greater detail under the purpose of these measures phase-in applies. So during the phase-in process, and that means if you're hosting a visit through 2017, the phase-in is still in place, which means you can submit a plan and your progress towards implementing that plan instead of data, which might be, or evidence which might be required for people with visits later than 2017, okay? So here, under the green note on the purpose of these measures, it talks about how you would gather data on a specific facet of preparation in relation to outcomes and where you would and what you would need to document in your plan. And it says sorry, I'm scrolling fast here. Okay, the self-study would document that the facet chosen and managed tested produces this useful information. Data is ideally available for at least 2 years, but there would be a thorough description of why a particular facet of preparation was selected, how it was tested or how it is intended to be tested, and what the goals are, what is hoped to be learned from that. Okay. back to our presentation. And I think I'll just stay on this page, which allows me, can you all, hopefully you can all see that, and you'll let me know if you can't. Component 3.1. Now this is the component that talks about recruitment into your teacher preparation programs, and it specifically says a recruitment plan, okay, that can be submitted. In that plan, you need to include the need. What is your recruitment need? What kind of outreach are you going to make? Who you're going to contact? Where you're going to put information? How you're going to reach the candidates that you're looking to recruit? What are your numerical goals and your baseline? Let's say, for example, that you have you don't have any males in your elementary education program, and maybe one of your strategic recruitment plan goals would be to recruit more males into the elementary education major. And so you might say, well, we have 0 now, but our hope is to recruit 5 by the end of, 2016 or 2017, whatever. You'd monitor your progress, and you would outline that in your plan, and then you would talk about how you intend to analyze the results and changes that you intend to make. If you're submitting a plan, of course, you can't really talk about how you analyze the data because you're submitting a plan for gathering data. Okay, but you can certainly lay out what your intention is and what proposed changes based on your goals would be as a result of implementing the plan. So that's on the Accreditation Handbook, page 98. And we'll go to there quickly to take a peek at what the handbook says. So scrolling down to page 98. There we go, 3.1. Strategic recruitment plans, right there. And you can see where it notes that it should be based on your mission as well as employment opportunities, okay? And the needs to serve increasingly diverse populations. And as I noted earlier, it states exactly what the plan should include: outreach, numerical goals, based data, monitoring progress, analysis, judgment of adequacy of progress towards goals, making changes. And so this is a very good place also to pay attention to that green section where it talks about the phase-in, the apply, and how an adequate plan, and you can see right here, an adequate plan will demonstrate base points on current measures. And so the Accreditation Handbook can be extremely useful in guiding you in terms of the content in your plan for specific components or standards. All right. Let's go back to our show. And from the current slide, we're also going to look at standard or component 3.3 in the Accreditation Handbook again on page 101. It states that you can submit a case study plan, and that the case study plan can demonstrate knowledge of relevant literature about factors selected and predictive validity. This particular case study plan is targeted at those additional admissions criteria that you use for admission. As you know, the selectivity of admissions component for CAEP deals primarily with cohort GPA and with scores on standardized tests such as the SAT, ACT, GRE, etc. But component 3.3 says, we recognize, CAEP recognizes that there are other criteria that you might use for admission. And so here is where you can submit a plan to study those additional criteria for admission, okay? And discuss in your plan why you're selecting for those particular factors in the admission criteria and what the predictive validity is. So if you're selecting for, let's say, knowing that, assessing whether or not the candidate believes that all students can learn, how are you selecting candidates on that criteria? Comprise a study of that use of alternate criteria. And then once the candidates have exited your program and perhaps even entered their first year or two of teaching, to what degree did those factors that you were screening for about believing in all candidates that all students can learn, does that at all predict their effectiveness as teachers, the predictive validity of that particular factor? So there you go. And that's component 3.3 on the accreditation handbook on page 101. And we're going to pop right over to that handbook again and look at page 101 so that you can identify easily where that applies. Okay, here we go. Page 101 has the criteria, has the component listed out there. And you can see the intent of the component is to encourage providers to identify, use, and investigate, okay, non-academic measures of candidate quality admissions and during preparation. And the measures come together with the provider's study of their result. And so in the second box underneath that component, you can see where it talks about a provider case study to monitor performance and subsequent teaching through a case study. All right, and so putting together a plan for your case study and submitting that plan during the phase-in period and talking about your progress on implementing whatever portions of that plan you have been able to implement by the time your self-study is submitted is something that is acceptable to CAEP. Okay. Now, I'm going to pause for 1 second here and check on our participants and see if there have been any questions so far. Whoops. What happened here? Odd. Okay, I'm going to continue on here by sharing my PowerPoint. I'm not seeing any of my screens here. My sharing screens. Is everybody able to see my screens? Can somebody respond here? Talk out loud and tell me if you're able to see my screen. Hello?
Yeah, this is Mateo. I can't see your screen. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Thank you very much. How long have you not been able to see my screen?
For about a couple minutes. I've tried putting something in the chat. I see other people are trying to do the same.
Okay, here's what. I'm going to pause here, and I'm going to try to get that screen back up. I don't know what's going on here. Okay, let me get into the Cisco. It's showing that this is going on. Let's see, CAEP Staff 1. You can all hear me, so I know I'm still on the audio. Okay. I don't know why. All of a sudden my screen is not being shared with you. It simply disappeared. Okay, hold on 1 second. I'm going to try to get in another way, and we'll go back. I'm still on that slide that shows the table of where plans are acceptable to CAEP. So hang on 1 second. It's extremely slow. Let me see. Let me join and try to share my screen. This is so strange. My apologies to all of you. I don't know what happened here. This is definitely not my fault. Oh, brother. I've never had this happen before. Okay, I'm still here, people. I'm trying to get in and share my screen again. I'm not sure why it disappeared, but trying to get back into the site that will allow me to share my screen. And it appears to be coming up. There we go. It's in. Okay. Share my screen. Let me see. I do see some questions now. Thank you, people. You don't see anything other than the contact information. Don't see it. Lost the PowerPoint. Not able to see the screen. Okay. Going to try to share my screen. Share file. Share a PowerPoint. Good. It is coming up. It's taken a while, but it's coming. There we go. Okay. Now, can somebody tell me if you can see my screen?
Yeah, I can see your screen now.
Fantastic. Okay, let me get that a little bigger. Okay. So this is what we've been talking about. And this is the chart that I was referring to. While I was talking. The various standards or components, where you can find a reference to the plan or plans in the accreditation handbook, and what are the details of the plan that is described in the accreditation handbook to be submitted. We had just talked about a case study plan to demonstrate 3.3, admission, selectivity, other criteria, okay, then the GPA or test scores. So what we want to focus on now is Standard 4 itself. As you know, Standard 4 is about program outcomes. It's about impact on P12 learning. It's about teaching effectiveness. It's about employer satisfaction and candidate satisfaction. And CAEP has said that during the phase-in period, which extends through the end of 2017, that a plan can be submitted when data is not available. And so what I've done is to save, let me, good, okay. I'm paying very careful attention here to make sure that I don't get booted out of my screensaver again. Oh my gosh, okay. The CAEP Evidence Guide, and I just got booted out of screensaver again. Can you all see this? Unbelievable. There we go. Okay. Here's what I'm going to say. Apparently, every time I switch to show you my documents, such as the accreditation handbook or the evidence guide, which I've been able to do in the past quite easily, screensaver disappears, and you can't see my screen at all. So I'm simply going to talk through this about the other documents and not share them with you during the presentation. If you go to the evidence guide, not the accreditation handbook. Accreditation handbook on page 84 describes the phase-in when data is not available, but you can also find details about that in the evidence guide. It talks specifically about Standard 4 and what can be submitted when state data is available, and then what you can do if state data is not available to you. And this is one of the key parts of the phase-in plan, where CAEP and the commission that oversaw the standards and developed the standards felt and knows that many states do not have this data available yet, and yet felt strongly that they needed to retain this as part of the CAEP standards. And so CAEP has developed this phase-in set of plans and criteria for submission with your self-studies through the end of 2017. So you can submit a plan that says, here's how we're going to gather data about impact on P12 learning because in our state that data is not available. Here's how we're going to gather data on teacher effectiveness because at the current time that data is not available to us. Okay, so that's where standard 4 accepts, the entire standard accepts plans inlaid with data, okay? And then last, component 5.3. Now this is the quality assurance standard, quality assurance system. On the accreditation handbook on page 111, well-planned tests are acceptable when they have baseline data, describe your intervention, talk about your comparison, and talk about next steps. Okay, the well-planned tests here are akin, if you can see it here, to component, what's available in component 2.3. Okay, which says that there can be tests of a facet of your placements to establish that the breadth and the depth and the coherence of your placements are sufficient to effectively prepare your candidates. So too with component 5.3, where you can have a well-planned test, okay, of some aspect of your preparation program, and provided you include baseline data, intervention, comparison, next steps. So we're going to go to the next slide here and talk about, next, and talk about where else CAEP is allowing plans to be submitted. So, 3 other places, the Selective Improvement and the Transformation Initiative. If you are following either of those 2 pathways to accreditation, as opposed to the inquiry brief, both the Selective Improvement has a plan that can be submitted about what aspect of your program you're going to identify as in need of improvement and how you're going to proceed. And the Transformation Initiative pathway allows you to submit the plan for your research study on what you consider to be a model of teacher preparation practice, okay? And then, and we'll go into each one of those in just a minute, and then the assessment rubric. If you have the CAEP assessment rubric, and again, I have it available here, I just don't want to lose my screen to you by clicking on those. The assessment rubric in categories 9 and 10 allow for plans that detail the steps that you're going to take to ensure validity and reliability. So I think this is helpful because if validity and reliability have not been well established on the instruments that you're using on your assessments, then this is a way for you to submit to CAEP in your self-study a plan that says, look, we haven't done the reliability or validity on this particular instrument, whether that's your observation rubric or your, let's say your survey, your employer survey, but we're going to do it, and here's how we're going to do it, and that those kinds of plans are acceptable. The one thing that's important to realize in plans for validity or reliability is that you need to include the steps taken following along with what are the research standards. So you're going to need to do some homework to understand a little bit about how validity and reliability are assured and to follow the research standards for both of those. Now, I'm going to pause here for a minute and ask if there are questions. I've pulled up my participant list. I've opened up the chat. Right now, I don't see anything in the chat. If you do have a question, please address it to me as the host or the presenter, and then it will come up. I'm going to view all attendees and see if anybody has their hand up, but I don't see anybody right now with their hand up. So if you have any questions, please speak up. No, there's a lot of information. No? Okay. So here's what I'm going to do. A different view here. Okay. And I'm going to go down to more slides and get back to my slides.
Excuse me, Deborah?
Yes, please.
This is Joe again. I was trying to write a question in the Q&A, but wasn't working. Do you have, so can I just ask over by voice?
Yes, please.
Okay. Are there any specific analyses that we should run, that you recommend that we run in regards to reliability? Or, because when you say following research standards, is there any way you could probably address that?
Not right now. We're doing a webinar on reliability and validity a little later, and I will definitely dig into that and check with CAEP staff on that. Okay, on some of these things, you know, we could have a conversation about it, but I'd really rather confirm with CAEP staff that that's their approach, that that's something that they agree upon. Okay?
All right.
So let me delay on that question, but not forever.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? Okay. So let's go now to the next slide.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please do.
I don't know. I've tried to work on the chat and it didn't seem to work. Are we going? I apologize for coming in a little bit late, but will we receive a copy of the PowerPoint?
Yes, they post it on the CAEP website following this presentation. It'll go up in a couple days.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, probably for that table, right?
Yes.
That table, yeah, that table has some good information on it. And here's what, if you want to email me after this, I'll send it to you directly. Okay? My email address was on the very first slide. It's real simple. It's deb.eldridge@gmail.com. And if you email me, I can shoot it off to you right away.
Is
okay, so here's
E-R-I-D-G-E?
Yes, E-L-D-R-I-D-G-E @gmail.com. Okay, we'll go on to look at the three types of plans. Basically, you've got your selected improvement plan, your transformation initiative plan, and then all the other plans we talked about on that table. Okay? So the selected improvement plan you can find in the accreditation handbook, pages 59 to 61. I'm not intending to spend a lot of time on this today. Reason being that there is a lot of information in the accreditation handbook. It tells you these are the 5 areas that they expect. It describes what the kinds of questions they would expect to be addressed in each of those sections. And it also has a rubric for the evaluation of a selected improvement plan. So with that information, that outline, that description, and the rubric, I think you're in pretty good shape for putting together a selected improvement plan. As you can see, the basic is describe what area you're going to be studying that you feel there's a need for improvement in your program and why you're choosing it. Lay out your goals and objectives. Talk about what your strategies are for intervention and any baseline data that you have at the time that helps to give credence to why you selected that particular facet for improvement, how you're going to collect your data and analyze it, how you propose to, and then you need to make a statement about your capacity to implement and complete the plan. What CAEP is saying here in this 5th component is that so often there can be very detailed and ambitious plans submitted. And then the reality is, you know, that faculty have courses to teach, and there's a lot of things going on at a school of education. We understand that. And so be realistic about what you can and are willing, what you can do, what your faculty is willing to commit to, and what your resources are for your selected improvement plan, okay? I don't believe in the rubric. You're going to find that it has to be grandiose in order to get approved by CAEP. What they really want to see is that you've selected something that's important to you and that you acknowledge you'd like to be better at, and that you've got a plan for improvement in that area, and that you're able to accomplish it, basically. Okay. So next slide talks about the transformation initiative. And if you are doing a transformation initiative, then you know who you are. And at this point, you probably submitted a proposal. The transformation initiative is really a research study of some aspect of your preparation program that you believe could serve as a model to the profession, that you've got something to contribute to the field as a whole. So as opposed to identifying an area where you think you're in need of improvement and working towards that improvement, this is an area in which you feel you've made significant improvements and that you're effective in this particular aspect of teacher preparation, and that what you do is go about and propose the study that you will conduct that will really be something to disseminate to the field and make presentations on. So it's laid out pretty much, I guess, like a dissertation. You know, what's the significance, what are your objectives, the methodology, your design, your timeline, and then again, that capacity question. So again, I won't spend a lot of time on transformation initiative because the accreditation handbook lays each of these 6 sections out pretty well on pages 69 and 71. And then it follows with the rubric by which these plans are evaluated by CAEP. So I think you're in good shape if you pay attention to those documents in the accreditation handbook. So what we're really talking about here is, okay, so what about for all these other plans? And as you noted on the slides 4 and 5, I talked about the reliability and validity part that you can find in the accreditation rubric. I talked about the components in which a plan or a test, a well-planned test, can be submitted. And so I talked to CAEP staff about what they felt those kinds of plans, at a minimum, needed to include. And there is no rubric for the evaluation of these plans as yet. I know that there is one in development, but it hasn't been released yet. And so in talking with CAEP staff, they said, okay, here, at a minimum, we would expect this. We would expect the description of the focus of the plan. Because if you're simply submitting a plan, you want to be able to say, okay, we're really going to focus on component 3.3, additional admission selectivity. And the reason that we're focusing on that is because our mission states that we are preparing leaders, teachers who are leaders. And yet we haven't had an opportunity to really delve into that aspect of our preparation. So they want a description of the focus of trial, what the standard or component is that's being addressed, what the context is, what's your program context, and that is unique. For example, if you're an urban minority serving institution and some aspect of a plan for component 3.3, they want to know what's your context and why it is that you're focusing on that, and your goals and objectives. Then on just the same as with other plans, what's your rationale for this? Why is there a need for this particular focus? And what's your baseline data that establishes what your current state is? Whether this is for 1.4, submitting a plan on how candidates are going to be, how you're going to assess your candidates' preparation to teach to college and career-ready standards, then they want to know, okay, well, what do you know right now? Where are you now? What are the strategies and steps that you're going to implement? Perhaps you're going to add an additional component to each and every course that talks to the college and career-ready standards. Perhaps there's going to be workshops. I mean, I don't know, but what are the strategies or steps that you're going to be implementing in order to address the component that your plan is focused on? How are you going to collect data? How are you going to analyze it? And then the last piece, rather than talk about capacity for all these other plans, what CAEP staff felt was most important is to talk about how the quality of that data will be ensured. And so, again, you're probably getting to not just validity and reliability, but also those other components of quality of evidence that can be found in the evidence guide. And by that I mean talking about fairness, freedom of, free from bias. I'm talking about representativeness. I'm talking about relevance. I'm talking about cumulativeness of your data. All of those 10 criteria for the quality of evidence is outlined in the evidence guide in great depth and in an appendix at the end of the evidence guide. So be sure and touch base with what CAEP's perspective on evidence quality is, and consider including some of those aspects when you submit your plan. How are you going to ensure that the data is of high quality? Okay. Let me go to the next slide. Okay, again, a question or feedback pause right here. I see, Susan, you have your hand up. Was that from earlier? Or
yes, that was from earlier.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and in my chat,
I need to get rid of it.
You perpetually have your hand raised. Your arm's going to get tired.
Oh, there, I got rid of it.
Good. Okay. So let me go to my attendees and refresh here, and maybe your hand will disappear. No, it's still showing for me. Okay. Anybody else with any questions or comments or need for feedback or want to give me some feedback at this point? Okay. It's 5:43 p.m. and for plans, this is all I can present. We don't have an example of a plan that we can share with you, and most of the time when I do these, I present examples of portfolio scoring guides or examples where at all possible so that we can talk about the pros and cons, and there aren't any exemplars yet that CAEP has available to share with you to talk about this is a good plan, here's the parts that it includes, this is a not so good plan. Okay, so we're going to have to wait a little bit for an example to become available to us. And when it is, I know that CAEP will make that available to you. But I suspect it's going to be past the point where you're going to need to see it. I know I'm being a bit facetious there, but the next couple of years anyways, lots of plans will be submitted, and I suspect that the next thing we can hope for in a timely manner is that rubric for assessing plans, and I'll be certain to let you all know when that's available. I will be sending out a feedback survey, and the next two webinars that we're having, July 7th and July 16th, are on evidence submissions. One is how do you plan for what evidence to submit, and then what are the questions you're going to be asked to answer. The template for submitting your self-studies is under redevelopment right now, and I have heard from CAEP that it will be available in July, and so we'll be definitely referencing that template, and I hope it'll be available in time for those webinars. I do see a question in the chat room. Dorothy, thank you for sending it to host and presenter because it popped right up on my screen. It says, for a fall 2016 visit, when do we need to submit our selected improvement plan? And what is the process for submitting this? Your selected improvement plan is submitted at the same time as your self-study. You don't have to submit it in advance for approval. You submit it with your self-study, and it'll be part of the template. It'll pop up and ask you to submit your plan, okay, and to upload any evidence or documents you have in support of it. So it'll just be as part of your self-study. So if your visit is in the fall of 2016, and let's say your visit is in October 2016, then your self-study is due 8 months before that. So it would be due around March of 2016. So that's when you need to be ready with that. I hope that answered your question. Anybody else? Okay, well, I'm going to hang out here. We've got about 15 more minutes before we're officially over. These webinars are scheduled for an hour. We've got about 15 minutes left. I'm going to hang out here in case folks have anything they'd like to ask. That's the end of my show. Okay, I'm going to say end show right there. And if we need to refer back to one of the slides, we can do that easily. Anybody else with a question for me?
I just want to say thank you for doing this webinar. Appreciate the information.
Thank you, Mateo, and I promise I'll have an answer for you on the reliability validity plans when we do those webinars for sure. Thanks for asking it.
And Deborah, we can send you just a quick email to your Gmail asking for the PowerPoint. Is that okay?
Say that again. I'm sorry, it got a little jumbled. Okay.
Sorry, we can send you a quick email to your Gmail,
yep.
The one you provided, and just.
Yes, you can.
All right,
yep,
thank you.
I'll pop it out in the next 5 to 10 minutes.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Oh, great. I see another question. So it says we began developing our selected improvement initiatives a year ago. Does what we have accomplished up until next March become baseline data, or can we use 2013-14 as our baseline year? I think you can use 2013-14 as your baseline year. You're going to describe your plan. You're going to say this is what we started with in 2013-14, and then you're going to be able to talk about some of the data that you've already collected, okay, and some of the things that perhaps you're seeing already. I think that would be great. I think that there's no reason why CAEP would expect that it would be a blank slate before coming to them. In fact, they would encourage, I think, your initiative, having started it earlier, and these are our goals and objectives, and this is how far we've come along, and this is what we still have ahead of us. I think that's great. Good, the chat is working. Thank you, Dorothy, for choosing host and presenter. I have in the past not gotten chat messages, so this is good. Okay. Anybody else? I'm going to scroll up to that chart and keep that on the screen for us. All right, for those of you that are left, I thank you for sticking with me during that terrible situation where you lost my screen and it stopped sharing. I'm now going to stop recording the webinar. And thank you all for being here.